My card declined as my husband took my stepsister to Paris. He left me nothing. Then, a call. A cold voice said, "Audra Vance?" "I am Alistair Vance, Blythe's father. From now on, if you agree, I will call you daughter." His empire was about to burn. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Audra Vance, and I am 36 years old. It was late, and I mean really late. The night my husband, Corbin Thorne, had his private jet leave for Paris with my stepsister, Blythe Thorne, was the night my card failed at a grocery store. He was drinking champagne over the Atlantic. I was on the kitchen floor with instant noodles and divorce papers. The cashier at the all-night grocery store didn't even look at me. He just tapped the screen and repeated the phrase, his voice bored, declined. It was 11:45 p.m. I was standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a bodega on the Upper East Side, trying to buy a box of pasta and a bag of instant noodles. The card I used was the graphite black Centurion. The one Corbin insisted I carry for emergencies. This apparently did not qualify. "Try it again," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He sighed and ran it again. The machine gave a pathetic little chirp. "Declined, ma'am." I pulled up my phone, my fingers slipping on the glass. The banking app, the one link to our entire life, took a moment to load. Joint account access denied. Joint savings access denied. Thorne executive account access denied. A cold, methodical sweep. He hadn't just cut me off. He had erased me. A flicker of movement from the small television mounted above the expired lottery tickets caught my eye. It was muted, but the chirn was bright blue, financial gossip. And there he was. Corbin Thorne, my husband, CEO of Thorne Meridian Group. He was smiling. That brilliant, camera-ready smile that had raised $500 million last year. He was ascending the gleaming metal steps of a Gulfstream G650. His hand was placed firmly, possessively on the small of a much younger back. The camera zoomed in. Blythe Thorne, my 22-year-old stepsister. Corbin looked into the camera as if he knew I was watching. Blythe, oblivious or arrogant, just tossed her long blonde hair. The caption appeared at the bottom of the screen, "Thorne's European expansion, CEO and rising star Thorne, head to Paris." I slid the useless black card back into my wallet. "I'm sorry," I muttered to the cashier. "I forgot my PIN." I abandoned the pasta. I kept the instant noodles, paid for with the crumpled $20 bill I found in the bottom of my purse. The walk back to the penthouse was 15 blocks. The doorman, Hector, nodded respectfully. "Good evening, Mrs. Thorne." I wondered if he knew my key fob had been deactivated. It hadn't. Corbin was thorough. He wanted me to get inside. He wanted me to see the stage he had set. The private elevator opened directly into the foyer. I designed this place. Every inch of it. The reclaimed oak floors, the Calacatta marble, the soft, warm recessed lighting meant to make the floor-to-ceiling windows feel intimate, even as they overlooked the park. Tonight, that warm light felt surgical, illuminating my own autopsy. It was on the kitchen island, a thick cream leather envelope embossed with the logo of Corbin's personal law firm. This was different. This was clean. My hands were perfectly steady. I was almost proud of them. I broke the wax seal. There was no letter, no apology, just a document, friendly separation agreement. It was 50 pages long. Clipped to the front was a single sheet of paper, a printout from a real estate website. It showed a list of available one-bedroom and studio apartments in Queens. Beneath the listing was a single yellow sticky note stuck to the first page of the agreement. Corbin's familiar aggressive handwriting, 4 words. I trust you'll choose the mature option. Mature. The word he uses when he means silent. The word he uses when he's about to screw someone over. As if summoned, my phone vibrated violently on the marble countertop. And again. And again. A rapid burst of emails. One after another, stacking up on my lock screen. Sender, Thorn Meridian HR. Subject, formal notice. Subject, suspension of duties. Subject, urgent access revocation. Subject, pending strategic review. I opened the first one. Dear Miss Vance, pending a review of your current role, your executive functions and all system access are temporarily suspended. Effective immediately. Suspended from the company I built. The company I structured, the company whose entire operational backend I designed from scratch in our first apartment back when Thorn Meridian was just Corbin, me, and a whiteboard. The panic hit then, a physical weight in my chest. I dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. The user is on a flight message. Of course, he's over the Atlantic. I tried his assistant. Voicemail. I tried the head of legal. Voicemail. The purge was absolute. My thumb moved on its own, a reflex of self-destruction. Instagram. I didn't even have to search for her name. Blythe Thorn's story was the first one in the queue. A bright pink circle. I tap it. It was a boomerang, a crystal champagne flute. The bubbles rise and fall outside the small curved window of the G650. The sky is black. She tagged the location, Hotel Plaza Atheny, Paris. The caption, Paris, I'm yours. I threw the phone. It hit the sub-zero refrigerator with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor. I sank down, my back against the cold steel, the cheap bag of instant noodles clutched in my hand. I was a 36-year-old woman from Ohio, sitting on the heated floor of a $20 million penthouse, and I had just been fired and divorced via sticky note. The phone, lying face down, began to ring. The sound was sharp, violent in the silence. A number I didn't recognize. It must be the bank calling to inform me of the fraudulent activity. Or perhaps it's Corbin's lawyer, the one who drafted the mature option, calling to apply pressure. I crawled across the floor, my knees scraping on the Italian stone. I picked up the shattered phone. Hello. My voice was a croak. Audra Vance. The voice was not a lawyer. It was deep, gravelly, and cold as a winter morning. It held an authority that didn't need to be announced. Who is this? My name is Alistair Vance. The name hung in the air. Vance. I knew that name. He's one of the originals, a silent, massive investor in Thorn Meridian. The money behind the money. The man continued, his voice flat, precise. I am a primary investor in your husband's company. I am also Blythe's father. My blood stopped moving. I cannot breathe. Blythe, my stepsister, his daughter. I don't. No. He cut me off. You do not. But you will. I am aware that Corbin Thorn has frozen your assets. I am aware that he took my daughter to Paris on a jet funded by one of my subsidiary accounts. A pause. I can hear him breathing. He doesn't sound angry. He sounds interested. This combination of events, Alistair Vance says, I find more interesting than angering. It shows a profound lack of judgment on his part and on my daughter's. Silence stretches. I am just a receiver, a piece of stone at the bottom of a well. So, Mrs. Thorn. Audra. I have one and only one question for you. Do you want him back? Or do you want him ruined at your feet? The question was so blunt, so final. It cut through the panic. It gave me air. Ruined. I looked at the leather envelope on the counter, the list of studios in Queens, the sticky note. I thought of Blythe's champagne glass. My voice came out, and this time it did not shake. It was as cold as his. I am too tired to ask anyone to come back. But I still have enough energy to watch someone lose everything. For the first time, a sound breaks his measured tone. It's a laugh, but it's short and dry. It's the sound of a vault door closing. Good. That is the correct answer. So from this moment, I want you to consider yourself my daughter. And a daughter of mine does not sleep on the street. Tomorrow we begin. The line clicks dead. I sit in the darkness of the kitchen. The shattered phone still clutched in my hand. My reflection stares back at me from the blacked-out window. I am still here. I am still Audra Vance. I stood up. I walked to the island and picked up the friendly separation agreement. I smoothed the pages, looking at the insulting offer. The arrogant signature line waiting for my surrender. For the first time tonight, a very thin, very cold smile touched my lips. Okay, I whispered to the empty room, to the man 30,000 feet above the ocean. Fine. Let's see just how expensive Paris can get. Before the penthouse, before the private jets, before my name was ever associated with Corbin Thorne, there was Ohio. It was not the postcard Ohio of rolling green hills. It was the flat, gray Ohio of factory towns where the air smelled like damp cement and rust. And the only excitement was the Friday night football game or the latest round of layoff announcements. My mother was a registered nurse who worked the night shift. She moved through our small rented house like a ghost, smelling of antiseptic, stale coffee, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. My father left when I was 10. He didn't just leave. He evaporated. He went out for cigarettes and vanished, leaving behind a Ford Taurus he was upside down on and a stack of utility bills on the kitchen counter. That's where I learned my first lessons in finance. While other kids were learning algebra, I was learning how to read a shut-off notice. I learned what default meant. I learned how to negotiate a 30-day extension with a power company representative. My voice high and polite, pretending to be my mother. I learned that contracts and leases were not suggestions. They were iron traps. I discovered I had a mind for systems. By 16, I was working as a cashier at Mrs. Gable's Corner Market. It was a dying local shop, and I was bored. So I started watching. I watched the delivery schedules, the way she ordered inventory, the way customers moved through the aisles. On the back of a brown paper bag, I drew a new floor plan. I built a simple inventory system in a stolen notebook. I convinced her to move the high-margin items, the soda, the candy, to the front, and the milk to the back. Her profits went up 12% in 3 months. She gave me a $50 bonus and told me I was too smart to be stocking shelves. I knew she was right. I wasn't just driven to escape that month-to-month, hand-to-mouth existence. I was driven to understand and control the systems that governed it. A full academic scholarship and 3 part-time jobs got me a finance degree and a one-way bus ticket to Chicago. I started at the bottom in the back office of a mid-level property management firm. It was chaos. They managed old, decaying buildings with tangled ownership structures, horrific tenant records, and books that looked like they'd been kept by a drunk. I loved it. I became the cleaner. They would hand me a portfolio that was hemorrhaging money, a mess of code violations and angry tenants. I would spend weeks in that windowless office, rebuilding the entire operation from the ground up. I untangled the ledgers, renegotiated vendor contracts, and automated the rent collections. I made the assets stable. I made them profitable. My reputation for cleaning trash is how I ended up on a panel at the Midwest Real Estate Investment Summit. I was 28, the only woman on the stage not holding a microphone for someone else. My topic was effective operational processes in multifamily rental portfolios. And in the front row sat Corbin Thorne. He was electric, even sitting still. He seemed to be in motion. He had that Kennedy hair, a jawline that looked precision cut, and a suit that cost more than my annual salary. He was already a minor legend, the brilliant young founder of the fast-rising Thorn Meridian Group. But he wasn't scrolling on his phone. He wasn't whispering to an associate. He was watching me. And he was taking notes. When I stepped off the stage, he was the first person there. His handshake was firm, his eyes locked on mine. "Corbin Thorn," he said. "Thorn Meridian." He didn't compliment my dress. He didn't say I spoke well. He said, "Your data on vendor cost averaging versus tenant retention was brilliant. I've been trying to solve that exact problem." He talked for 20 minutes, not at me, but to me. He spoke about his vision, about building quality housing for the middle class, about disrupting the lazy old money developers who let their buildings rot. He was passionate. He was smart. He was, I saw instantly, a perfect version of my own ambition. But with one crucial difference, he already had the capital. He had the access. I just had the binders full of data. Our romance was built on those binders. It blossomed over late-night spreadsheets in my tiny, drafty studio apartment. We'd analyze deals he was considering, and he would listen, truly listen, as I tore apart an acquisition target's flawed accounting. He made me feel like a partner, not a conquest. He would wait outside my office in the Chicago snow, not in a flashy limo, but in his slightly beat-up Jeep, just to drive me home to my rundown building. He knew exactly when to be quiet, when to praise, and when to say the one thing I needed to hear: "You're smarter than all of them. Audra, they just don't know it yet." When I told my mother I was engaged, there was a long pause on the line. I could hear the faint click of her lighter. "Honey, that's wonderful," she finally said. Her voice was happy, but stretched thin, like fabric pulled too tight. "Now you listen to me. I'm proud of you. But you will never, ever be one of them. They are a different breed. You're just visiting their world. So you be smart. You keep your own bank account. And you never, ever give anyone all the paperwork, not even your husband." I laughed. I told her this was different. This was modern. We were equals. I dismissed her words as the fear of a different generation, the scars of a woman left with nothing. We were married at a resort in Colorado. Corbin called it understated luxury, which I thought was my taste. Looking back, I see that every choice, from the wildflowers to the menu, had been gently, expertly guided by Corbin and his team of planners. It was my taste, as approved by his brand. The wedding photos were cinematic. We looked like a happy, powerful, new American couple. But I remember the faces of his investors, the old money men from New York and Boston who stood on his side of the aisle. They smiled at me, but their eyes were assessing. They weren't looking at a new partner in the firm. They were looking at Corbin's smart wife, a capable, attractive accessory he'd picked up in the Midwest. The prenup arrived via email from his lawyer a week before the wedding. It was presented as a standard formality. It was a slaughter. It was designed to keep me entirely separate from Thorn Meridian. If we divorced, I would get a severance package, like a fired employee. My mother's warning, "Never give anyone all the paperwork," rang in my ears. I refused to sign. Corbin was stunned. We had our first real fight. I didn't cry or yell. I negotiated. I sat across from him in his high-rise office, the skyline of Chicago behind him, and I laid out my case. I used the same cold logic I used on plumbing contractors. "If my operational systems are going to be the backbone of this company's growth," I said, "then I am a founder, not an employee's wife. I am not signing this." It took 3 days. The arguments were quiet, precise, and brutal. I demanded a clause, not just for a payout, but for equity. A specific tiered percentage of Thorn Meridian Group vested immediately upon marriage, with further vesting tied to performance metrics that I knew I could hit. Finally, he relented. He sighed, running a hand through that perfect hair. Fine, Audra. Fine, if it makes you feel secure. His voice was smooth again. The loving fiancé. But his eyes, for the first time, I saw it. It wasn't anger. It was annoyance. It was the cold flash of irritation you see when a deal you thought was a bargain suddenly gets more expensive. I signed the revised document, the ink heavy on the page. I felt victorious. I thought I had secured my place, that I had won an equal footing in a modern marriage. I had no idea that I had just signed the single most important document of my life. I hadn't just negotiated a contract. I had just armed the weapon that years later would be the only thing left to save me. We moved to New York 2 years after the wedding. Thorn Meridian Group took 2 floors in a glass and steel tower overlooking Central Park. My name was etched onto a frosted glass door, Audra Vance, Director of Internal Operations. It was a title designed to sound secondary, administrative, a wife job. The real work was far different. Corbin was a visionary, a brilliant salesman who could charm a room full of skeptical billionaires into funding a dream. But he and his partners were chaos agents. They operated on charisma, handshakes, and adrenaline. They left behind a wake of broken spreadsheets, half-executed contracts, and operational nightmares. I was the cleaner, but I was also the architect. While Corbin was giving speeches, I was in the trenches. I designed the company's entire internal control system from scratch. I built the financial reporting dashboards that allowed us to actually see where the money was going in real time. I personally renegotiated our master contracts with our top 3 construction suppliers, saving us an immediate 8 figures. Our profitability didn't just increase, it stabilized. The firm, once a high-risk startup, became a reliable asset. But in the investor pitches, I was a prop. Corbin would stand in the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, all energy and magnetism. He would gesture to me, seated at the long mahogany table. "And this is my wife, Audra," he'd say with that disarming smile. "She handles our internal side. Keeps the lights on. Keeps the lights on." The boardroom was where the erasure was most complete. I would present a detailed 40-slide analysis on risk exposure in our new portfolios. I'd field a few polite questions. Then one of the older board members, all men, all over 50, would nod and turn his entire body to face my husband. "Good data, Corbin. So, what's your play here?" My analysis became good data. His guess became the play. Worse, Corbin became an expert at absorbing my contributions. I'd be in a development meeting, starting to outline a new diligence process. What if we standardized the environmental impact reports before acquisition? "That's a great point, honey," Corbin would cut in, smooth as silk, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's exactly what my team and I were just starting to implement. Glad we're on the same page." He would look at me with loving, collaborative eyes while seamlessly stealing the idea right out of my mouth. I wasn't just his wife. I was his in-house, uncredited think tank. Thorn Meridian grew. We expanded into high-end green residential projects in New York and Miami. More money, more staff, more complexity, and more shadows. As the one managing the books, I started seeing things that made my Ohio-trained stomach tighten. Consulting fees, massive ones, paid to LLCs in Delaware or the Caribbean that had no website, no staff, no discernible product. I saw wire transfers for pre-development costs on projects that didn't even exist yet. I brought it to Corbin one night in the sterile beauty of our penthouse. I had the printouts. "Corbin, who is Crestview Strategic Partners? We've paid them over $2 million this quarter." He didn't even look up from his iPad. He laughed. It was a soft, patronizing sound. "Honey, you worry too much. That's just how the business works. It's the cost of entry in these markets." "It looks like a slush fund," I said, my voice flat. He finally looked at me, his eyes suddenly cold. The charm turned off. Then stop looking at it, Audra. Focus on your dashboards. You're the best operator I know. Let me handle the strategy. It was a compliment wrapped around a command, stay in your lane. In the early years, he was cute about our success. He let me have full control over designing the penthouse. He encouraged me to plan lavish vacations. He loved telling the press our story, the rags to riches romance, the brilliant Midwest girl who captured the visionary's heart. From the factory town to Park Avenue, one fawning magazine profile read. But gradually that changed. The control tightened. Let's run that vacation itinerary by the PR team, he'd say. We need to make sure it aligns with the brand. Or, I'd rather you didn't wear that designer to the gala. They aren't aligned with our new green initiative. My life, my choices, even my wardrobe became subject to approval, not from a PR team, from him. The board meetings were a masterclass in polite misogyny. I was always the only woman at the table. They would greet me not with questions about the quarterly projections, but with comments. Audra, that blue dress you wore at the benefit last week was spectacular. My wife was asking about it. I learned to smile, a tight, bloodless smile. I learned to say, thank you, Howard. And then immediately pivot. If you'll turn to page 4, you'll see the cost per unit analysis. I would deliver my data perfectly and then watch as they turned to Corbin for the decision. It wasn't one single moment. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. It was the realization that I was living in a gilded cage. I had the penthouse, the driver, the clothes, but I had no power. My mother's voice came back to me, clear as a bell across the years, don't ever give anyone all the paperwork. So, I started a habit, a secret ritual. In the silence of my office, long after my assistant had gone home, I began building an archive. For every major contract I reviewed, every partnership agreement, every wire transfer that felt wrong, I made 2 copies. One went into the official cloud-based filing system. The second, a hard copy, was printed, initialed by me with the date I reviewed it, and placed in a file. That file went home with me. It went into a fireproof safe I'd had installed in the back of my custom-built closet, hidden behind a row of cashmere coats. I forwarded suspicious emails to a private encrypted address I'd created. I saved chat logs. I took screenshots of meeting calendars that were later deleted. I wasn't planning a war. I was just documenting the truth. I was ensuring that if the worst day ever came, I would not be the woman left with nothing. The beginning of the end was named Europa Vista Residential. It was Corbin's new baby, a massive billion-dollar fund to acquire luxury properties in Europe. He called me into his office. He sat on the edge of his desk, not behind it, a practice move to show he was being casual, a partner. Audra, he said, his voice full of mock concern. I'm worried about optics with you as COO and me as CEO. Launching this new international fund could look like a conflict of interest to our new European investors. They're very old school. What are you suggesting? I asked. I think it's time to elevate you, he said, smiling. The picture of a proud husband. We're creating a new role for you, non-executive strategic advisor. You'll be off the day-to-day grind. You'll have time to focus on the big picture and the house in the Hamptons. You've earned it. It sounded like a promotion. It was a corporate assassination. It meant I was off the executive committee. It meant I was removed from all banking authorizations. It meant my system access would be downgraded. I was being moved from the engine room to the observation deck, where I could watch but not steer. I realized with a clarity that felt like swallowing ice that in every official photo, I looked like a tasteful accessory. In every legal document, my name was always on a separate line, smaller, indented, nested beneath the words, wife of Corbin Thorne. I started to ask myself the question, the one I'd been avoiding. If I was pushed out tomorrow, what would I have? An art collection? Some expensive dresses and a resume that everyone in New York would believe was a gift from my husband. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even an employee. I was a beautiful, well-kept, and very, very useful amenity. The summer MBA intern program was an annual ritual at Thorn Meridian. It was Corbin's pet project, a way to build loyalty and more practically to find cheap, brilliant labor from the children of our investors. This year, one of them separated from the pack immediately. Her name was Blythe Thorn. She was 22, with the kind of polished, effortless beauty that comes from generations of money. She was smart, fast, and she radiated a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She knew how to play the game. She knew how to speak to power. She was the daughter of Alistair Vance, one of our largest and most silent institutional investors. Alistair was my father-in-law's business partner who later married my stepmother. That made Blythe my stepsister. The whole thing was just too perfect for Corbin. Corbin, citing the need to personally mentor our top-tier talent, assigned her to work directly with him. At first, I watched her with a detached interest. She was a younger, shinier, bolder version of myself, but one who had never had to read a shut-off notice. She had never worried about a grocery bill. I almost admired her audacity. That admiration curdled and died about 3 weeks later. My advisor role still gave me passive access to Corbin's calendar and inbox. It was a professional necessity, or so I told myself. I began to see them. Emails timestamped at 1 o'clock in the morning, then 2 o'clock in the morning. The subjects were cloaked in business speak: breakthrough idea, midnight thoughts on the Miami project. The content was anything but. Her emails were breathless, fawning, full of praise for his vision. His replies, from a man who famously believed exclamation points were a sign of a weak mind, were littered with emojis, a winking face, a clinking champagne glass. It was unprofessional. It was intimate. It was a language I recognized, but one he had never used with me, not even in our earliest days. The real line was crossed at a networking gala for the Europa Vista Fund. It was a rooftop event in Midtown. The air heavy with the smell of expensive gin and the quiet murmur of deal flow. I was stuck talking to a banker about yield curves when I saw them across the room. Corbin was introducing Blythe to a Swiss investor, a man we needed desperately. Corbin had his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't a brief, polite this-way touch. His hand was resting there, fingers splayed, his thumb occasionally moving in a small proprietary circle. It was a gesture of possession, disguised as mentorship. I felt a sudden cold nausea. This was the same man who recoiled from public affection, who always said he hated workplace touching. He was guiding her, showing her off. And the Swiss investor was looking from Corbin to Blythe with a knowing, indulgent smirk. He wasn't seeing a brilliant intern. He was seeing the bonus package. I waited until we were home in the vast, silent cathedral of our penthouse. I kept my voice perfectly level. Corbin, I think the late-night emails with Blythe are crossing a line, and touching her like that at the event tonight was inappropriate. I didn't accuse. I stated a fact. He was pouring a scotch. He stopped, turned, and then he laughed. It was a soft, pitying sound. He walked over to me, kissed my forehead, and stroked my hair. It was a gesture meant to soothe a hysterical child. "Honey," he said, his voice a balm of condescension. "Are you actually getting jealous of an intern? She's a kid. Audra, she's barely old enough to rent a car." He held my gaze, his eyes full of practiced sincerity. "You know me. She's just smart and she's eager. I'm mentoring her. That's all. Please don't make this weird." My suspicion wasn't just dismissed. It was diagnosed. It was my problem. My jealousy, my insecurity. He had taken my valid observation and twisted it into a personal failing. I was being gaslit in my own living room. As this personal erosion accelerated, so did the professional one. Our CFO, Gerald Hines, a man who would light himself on fire if Corbin told him it was good for the quarterly numbers, requested a meeting. He sat across his desk from me, visibly nervous, shuffling papers. "Audra, we're doing some structural optimization," he began, avoiding my eyes. "The board wants to streamline our primary cash accounts for European expansion. Faster wires, less red tape." He pushed a stack of legal documents toward me. "It's just a new regulatory requirement. We need to move the main capital accounts off the dual signature protocol and consolidate authorization." I scanned the page. My name, the co-signer on every major Thorn Meridian account, was being removed. I was being cut off from the flow of money. "Why, Gerald?" I asked, my voice flat. "New banking regulations," he said. The lie thin and ready. "Our outside counsel confirmed it. It's just a formality. We just need your signature to approve the change." The paperwork was perfect. The legal justifications were dense and plausible. I had been moved into a non-operational role. My refusal would look petty, obstructive. I had no grounds to fight it. But my advisor role, the gilded cage Corbin had built for me, still gave me access to the high-level financial dashboards I had personally designed. I could no longer sign the checks, but I could still see where they were going, and they were going to the Caribbean. I saw a series of new SPVs, special purpose vehicles, pop up under the Europa Vista Fund, shell companies based in the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. This was standard for tax purposes. What wasn't standard was the amount of money flowing into them. These shell companies were being funded with amounts far exceeding the value of the projects they were supposedly tied to. Millions, tens of millions, just sitting there, labeled as capital buffer or future development fees. I confronted Corbin in his office. This time, he didn't laugh and he didn't try to soothe me. His eyes went flat and cold. "Audra, I told you to let me handle the strategy," he said, his voice low and sharp. "You're not an auditor. You're my wife. Stop digging. You won't like what you find in this business." It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. The final piece of the trap fell into place by accident. An administrative assistant forwarding a long email chain about scheduling forgot to delete the history. The original email, buried at the bottom, was from Corbin to our chief legal counsel, sent 3 weeks ago. The subject line was Audra Risk Mitigation. My blood turned to ice. I read it and read it again. Corbin was discussing my new non-executive role. He was asking the lawyer to review our prenup to find ways to minimize our exposure if Audra ever decided to leave the company. And then the sentence that stopped my heart. He'd written, "She's resisting the new structure. Find a way to make it work. It's best to keep her signing some of the liability paperwork just in case. We need her on the hook if the EU regulators get aggressive. Keep her on the hook." He wasn't just pushing me out. He wasn't just cheating on me with my stepsister. He was methodically, expertly building a firewall of my body. He was setting me up to be the scapegoat for the Caribbean accounts. If the whole thing went sideways, the disgruntled wife who was overseeing operations would be the one to take the fall. The feeling of being cornered, of being gassed while the house was set on fire, was suffocating. But I come from Ohio. I come from a mother who worked night shifts. We are not fragile. That night, I stopped being a wife. I became an archivist. I went into the office on a Saturday, telling the security guard I had a project to finish. I used my remaining high-level credentials. I began to download everything. I copied 8 years of data from the internal servers onto a series of encrypted hard drives. I saved system access logs. I took high-resolution screenshots of the wire transfers to the Cayman accounts. I pulled every email Corbin thought he had deleted from the exchange server. I even met an old college fund friend for lunch, a woman who is now a partner at a major securities law firm. "Hypothetically," I said, stirring my iced tea. What are the whistleblower protections for an executive who suspects creative accounting in a private fund? She looked at me, her eyes sharp. Hypothetically, she said, the person who reports it first with clean hands gets immunity. The person who waits gets called a co-conspirator. That night, I stood in our cavernous master bathroom, the walls covered in book-matched Italian marble. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing a silk blouse that cost $1,000. My eyes were dark, thinned by lack of sleep. I had spent the last week, not as a wife, but as a forensic accountant. I looked at my reflection, and I asked the question out loud to the empty, echoing room, am I just the secretary for my own future lawsuit? I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. The thought was too big. I was planning to survive. I was ensuring that if and when Corbin Thorne decided to push me out of his life, he would find my hands clasped firmly around his ankles. The official announcement came via a company-wide memo. Thorne Meridian Strategic European Summit. Corbin would be leading a small, agile team to meet with key strategic investors for the new Europa Vista Fund. The attached itinerary listed the team members: Corbin Thorne, CEO, David Chin, Senior VP of Capital Markets, and Blythe Thorne, MBA intern. The justification was a single insulting line, to provide a high-level learning opportunity for our rising talent. I was still technically the non-executive strategic advisor. I was also technically his wife. I requested a meeting. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked into his office. He was on the phone, looking out over the park. He motioned for me to wait, holding up one finger. I didn't wait. I closed the door hard. The sound made him flinch. He hung up. Audra, I'm in the middle of. You're taking an intern to Paris, I said. It wasn't a question. On a capital-raising trip instead of your co-founder? He sighed, adopting his patient husband persona. Honey, we've been over this. You're non-operational now. It would send a mixed message. It would look like you're second-guessing me. I need you here holding the fort. You're the one I trust to keep the team calm while I'm gone. He smiled at me, that fake, grateful, manipulative smile. It was the same smile he used on the board. He was treating me like just another employee to be managed. I'm not holding the fort, Corbin, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I'm the person who built the fort. You are taking your girlfriend on a business trip and spending it on our investors. The smile vanished. His face went blank, then cold. You are being hysterical and you are wrong. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a fun to launch. The day before his flight, the final blade fell. An email from HR subject, important update, role reevaluation. It was a masterpiece of corporate legal speak. Given the new strategic direction, and to further avoid any potential conflicts of interest, your role as strategic advisor will be restructured. I scrolled past the justifications to the new terms: 6-month unpaid advisory period, pending a full review of internal structuring. Unpaid. They had done it. They had legally, cleanly, and methodically severed my last tie to the company's payroll. I was no longer an executive. I was no longer a paid advisor. I was just, in their eyes, a wife. And Corbin was about to take care of that, too. The night he left for the airport, he came home for exactly 15 minutes. I heard his key in the door. He strode in, not as a husband, but as a man on a schedule. He was already pulling off his tie. He didn't look at me as I stood in the kitchen. Flight's in 2 hours, he said, walking straight to the master closet. I heard the shower turn on, a high-pressure hiss. He was out in 5 minutes, a towel around his waist, already checking his phone. He dressed in the dark of the closet, fresh suit, black, perfectly tailored. He came back into the living room, packing his do kit. The scent of his expensive cologne, the one I'd bought him, filled the air. It was a smell I used to associate with security. Now it just smelled like an exit. So that's it, I said. Unpaid? He zipped his bag. He didn't look up. It's for the best. Audra cleans things up. He walked to the kitchen island, the one I'd carved from a single block of marble. He placed a thick cream-colored leather envelope on the counter. The one from his personal law firm. This is the mature option, he said. I knew exactly what it was. The draft from my nightmare. The separation agreement. You're divorcing me. We're separating, he corrected, finally looking at me. His eyes were flat, bored. This was the last item on his pre-flight checklist. I'm offering you a clean break, a generous one, considering. Generous? It's a conditional offer. You sign the NDA. You move out of the penthouse. You'll be well taken care of, but the offer expires in 7 days. After that, we use the other options. I looked at him. The man I had built a life with. The man I had pulled from chaos and given a structured empire. What other options, Corbin? The ones where you pinned the Caribbean accounts on me. His face didn't flicker, but his eyes hardened. I knew you were digging. You should have stopped when I told you to. I'm giving you a beautiful, quiet exit, Audra. I'm giving you the chance to just disappear. Take it. Be smart. Don't be the person from Ohio right now. It doesn't suit you. He walked to the elevator. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. The brushed steel doors slid shut. I stood in the silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it. I walked to my laptop. I had an electric bill, a small one for my personal website due today. I logged in, entered the details of the joint Amex. Payment declined. I tried the joint debit card. Declined. I opened the banking app. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. He hadn't just put the papers on the table. He had detonated the charges on his way out the door. The grocery store. It was all part of the plan. My own savings. I had one small checking account from before I met him. I'd been pouring every cent of my salary back into Thorn Meridian funds, believing it was our company, our future. I had less than $5,000 to my name. I didn't panic. I got methodical. I went to my closet, not to the dresses. I went to the safe hidden behind the coats. I pulled out the hard drives, the binders of printed files. I put them in the bottom of a large, anonymous-looking duffel bag. I packed 1 week's worth of simple clothes, jeans, sweaters, my running shoes. I took my laptop, my personal phone, and the burner phone I had bought 2 weeks ago. I walked out of the penthouse. I didn't look back. I took the service elevator down to the garage, past the row of black Escalades and my own parked Range Rover. I got into the only car that was solely, legally in my name, a 4-year-old Audi sedan. I drove out of Manhattan, through the tunnel, and onto the New Jersey Turnpike. I drove for an hour until the city skyline was just a smudge of light in my rearview mirror. I pulled off at an exit that advertised food/lodging. I found it, the Traveler's Lodge. It had a flickering neon sign, and most of the parking spots were taken by long-haul trucks. I paid cash for 1 night. The room smelled of bleach, stale smoke, and despair. The carpet was sticky. The bedspread had a cigarette burn in it. 2 hours ago, I had been standing in a $20 million penthouse. I locked the deadbolt and the chain. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. I called Sarah, my old colleague from Chicago, the one person I still trusted. "My God, Audra, where are you?" she whispered, her voice sharp with panic. "The office is insane. They just announced your sabbatical." "He's gone to Paris," I said. He cut me off. He left papers. Come stay with me, she said instantly. I have a guest room. We'll figure this out. We'll get a lawyer. I looked at the water-stained ceiling. I can't. If he's doing this, he's watching you. He's watching everyone. I need to be somewhere where no one gets hit by the shrapnel. I hung up, promising to call again. I was in a war zone now. I had to assume every friend was a liability. Every move was being watched. The exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. I lay back on the lumpy pillow, still in my clothes. I pulled out my phone. A stupid, self-destructive impulse. Instagram. Blythe Thorne's story was new, posted just 30 minutes ago. She was at the opera in Paris. A snapshot of the grand, gold-encrusted ceiling, the caption, Culture plus Capital. At that exact crushing moment, an email notification lit up my screen. It was from an automated legal server, from Corbyn's personal lawyer. Subject, friendly separation proposal, time-sensitive. The envelope I'd left on the kitchen counter, now digitized, delivered to my exile. A PDF. A 7-day expiration clock. I shut my eyes. The humiliation was total. The cheap room, the smell, the tacky Instagram post, the cold legal threat. I was a fool, a smart woman from Ohio who had let herself be turned into a stupid, helpless wife. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the particle board desk with a clatter. I lay there in the silence, in the dark, for 2 full minutes, just breathing. Then the phone on the desk lit up. It wasn't an email. It was a call from a number I did not recognize. My heart stopped. I stared at it. It rang again. A premonition. A cold, electric feeling ran up my spine. This was not a lawyer. This was not a bank. This was something else. I got up, my legs shaking, and crossed the room. I picked up the phone. Hello, Audra Vance. Audra Vance. The voice was deep, cold, and full of a power I had never heard before. Yes. Who is this? My name is Alistair Vance. The name hung in the stale, smoky air of the motel room. Vance. I knew the name, but only as a ghost. A line item on a cap table. A massive old money East Coast family office that had poured tens of millions into Thorne Meridian's initial funds, but who never took a board seat, never attended a meeting. He was the invisible money, and he was the father of the girl currently in Paris with my husband. I don't know what you want, I managed. My voice was hollow. I want clarification, Alistair said. His voice was precise, clipped, as if he were dictating a memo. I received a third-quarter capital report from Mr. Thorne's office this afternoon. It does not reconcile with my own files. The discrepancy is significant. He paused. The silence on the line was heavy. Absolute. This discrepancy suggests one of 2 possibilities, he continued. Either you, Mrs. Thorne, as the architect of the company's internal operations and the woman who supposedly reviews every line item, are profoundly incompetent. I bristled, my spine straightening. I am not. No, he agreed, the sound flat. I do not believe you are. I have read every operational memo you've written since 2017. The one signed A. Vance. You are meticulous. Which leaves only the second, far more interesting possibility. Corbyn Thorne is playing a very dangerous game with my money. Why are you telling me this? I whispered, my hand gripping the cheap plastic receiver. Because I have had my private team investigating your husband for 6 months. The financials have smelled wrong for some time. But this, he let out a dry, cold sigh that was devoid of any emotion. This performance, taking my daughter, a 22-year-old child, on a private jet funded by one of my own subsidiaries at the exact same moment he locks his COO and wife out of her own accounts that are not business. That is arrogance. It is a stunningly stupid move, and it has forced my hand. I am calling you, Mrs. Thorne, because you appear to be the only adult left in this entire organization. My mind was spinning, trying to find the angle. The room was dark, the only light coming from the crack in the curtains, illuminating the dirty carpet. He was offering a lifeline, but it felt like another chain. Corbin, the charming savior who had pulled me from Chicago. Now Alistair, the cold savior, calling me to a motel. Just another rich man moving his pieces on the board. So what is this, Mr. Vance? I said, injecting a layer of my mother's Ohio sarcasm into my voice. The paternal rescue? You're calling to save the poor abandoned wife. Is that your move? I was testing him, pushing. I expected him to be offended. Instead, he was merely impatient. Do not be tedious, Mrs. Thorne. I am a businessman. I do not waste time on sentiment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I am calling, he continued, his voice dropping back to that icy calm. Because I have spent the last 72 hours reading your file, not the fawning magazine profiles, the real one. Your prenuptial agreement, Clause 14, subsection B, and more importantly, your revised shareholder agreement, Article 7.3. He was quoting them. He was quoting the exact clauses I had fought for. My heart, which I thought had stopped, began to pound, a slow, heavy, painful drumbeat against my ribs. He had done his homework. Corbin and his lawyers are sloppy, Alistair said, a note of genuine disgust in his voice. In their haste to build his public-facing brand, they left a critical vulnerability. Those clauses, which I suspect you wrote yourself, state that any new fund structure, specifically any offshore entity utilizing the Thorne Meridian brand and leveraging capital from existing principal investors, requires my signature, I finished, my voice barely a whisper. Requires the explicit wet ink signature of Audra Vance as original co-founding partner, he corrected. Not strategic advisor, not wife, co-founding partner. Which means, Mrs. Thorne, that the entire Europa Vista Fund, all those shell companies in the Caymans, the very trip he is on right now, is built on a foundation of sand. Legally, without your signature on those documents, those SPVs are not just unstable, they are fraudulent. I sank onto the edge of the sagging motel bed. The encrypted hard drives in my duffel bag suddenly felt 10 times heavier. He was right. Corbin had moved too fast, too arrogantly. He had pushed me out before securing my signature on the new fund. He thought my silence was guaranteed. He thought I was beaten. So, Alistair continued, his voice a sharp blade. I am offering you a business relationship, not a rescue. I will provide you with a full legal team, the best forensic accountants in the country, a secure place to live, and an operating line of credit. Effective immediately. You will not be poor by morning. The car, the clothes, the penthouse, they are irrelevant. The air in the room felt thin. I could barely breathe. And in return? In return, you will open those files I know you have, the ones you've been hiding in your closet. You will give my team every email, every wire transfer, every spreadsheet you've been collecting. You will tell us everything Corbin Thorne has been hiding, not just from me, but from the SEC. I don't want him corrected. I want him dismantled. Dismantled? The word echoed in the cheap, empty room. It was precisely what I wanted, but the terms were wrong. I looked at my reflection on the dark television screen. A ghost, a woman who had just traded one owner for another. No, I said. There was a long, dangerous silence on the line. I had challenged him. You will need to elaborate, he said, his voice flat. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vance. I truly do, but I am done being a passenger. I will not trade one powerful man's control for another. I will not be your weapon. I don't want another man running my life. My voice was shaking, but I meant every single word of it. I heard him laugh. It was the same dry, vault door sound from the first call. "Good," he said. "That is precisely what I needed to hear. I have no use for another spoiled child who needs to be managed. One daughter acting the fool in Paris is quite enough." He paused, and his voice softened. "Just a fraction, but it was there. I need a partner, Audra, and you need a proxy. Let's not complicate it. As for the daughter comment, let's just say I protect my family. And Corbin just put you and your equity firmly on my side of the ledger." The word daughter hung in the air. It wasn't warm. It wasn't paternal. It was a statement of alliance, a declaration of assets. He was claiming me, but unlike Corbin, he was claiming my mind, not my image. I stood there, smelling the stale smoke and bleach, the insulting legal proposal from Corbin's lawyer sitting in my inbox. I could sign it. I could take the generous payout, disappear into one of those Queen's studios, and live a quiet, humiliated life. I could be the mature option. Or I could get into a car with this cold, terrifying man. I could use the archive I had built. I could burn the entire rotten structure to the ground and stand in the ashes. "I don't want compensation, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice clear and final. "I don't want a payout. I want control. I want company." Another beat of silence, then approval. "That," Alistair Vance said, "is the correct answer. Control is always the prize. The rest is just noise." "What happens now?" "You will sleep. Tomorrow morning at precisely 9 a.m. a black Mercedes sedan will be waiting for you in the motel parking lot. The driver's name will be Arthur. He will not speak to you. You will give him your current phone, and he will give you a new one." "What about my things?" "The penthouse." "Forget the penthouse," he said dismissively. "The penthouse is a box full of his things. Leave the keys on the motel desk. Let him wonder. My daughter still thinks Paris is the destination for us. Audra, the destination is the boardroom." The line clicked dead. I didn't move for a long time. The neon sign outside the window cast a faint, sickly red glow onto the wall. I walked into the small, disgusting bathroom and looked at myself in the cracked mirror over the sink. My hair was flat, my face pale. I looked like a refugee, but my eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a co-conspirator. I was no longer Mrs. Corbin Thorne, the CEO's pretty, smart wife. I was a partner in a hostile takeover. I went back into the room, picked up my duffel bag, and zipped it shut. I took the friendly separation agreement that I had brought from the penthouse, the one that I had refused to sign. I tore the thick, expensive paper in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces into the overflowing trash can. I had just chosen my side. The Mercedes that picked me up from the motel was silent. The driver, Arthur, was exactly as Alistair had described, built like a bank vault, and he did not speak. He took my cracked iPhone and the cheap burner I'd bought, handing me a slim, heavy, encrypted device in a black case. We did not drive to New York. We drove south to Philadelphia, pulling into the underground garage of a high-rise that was expensive, but aggressively anonymous. It was a corporate apartment leased by a shell company under the name F. Vance Financial Consultant. It was clean, sterile, and had no personality. It was a war room. The next morning, she arrived. Odessa King. She was not what I expected. She was not an old-money, silver-haired patrician. She was a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, hair pulled into a severe knot, and a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. She didn't shake my hand. She placed 2 identical black briefcases on the glass dining table, snapped them open, and set up her laptop. "Alistair pays me an obscene amount of money to win," she said, her voice a low rasp. She didn't do introductions. "I do not handle divorce. I handle securities fraud." I am here for one reason, to ensure that you do not go to prison for your husband's crimes, and if time permits, to make several very wealthy men sleep in the kind of room you were just in. I unpacked my hard drives, the archive, the binders I had hauled out of the penthouse. This is everything, I said. 8 years of data. For the next 18 hours, we did not sleep. We worked. Odessa's team, 2 forensic accountants who looked barely old enough to vote but moved with terrifying speed, began to build the timeline. We ingested the data. We cross-referenced Corbin's travel calendar with wire transfers. We mapped the flow of money from our legitimate funds into the black hole of the Caribbean SPVs. And then, on the second day, I saw it. One of the accountants flagged a transfer. $5 million, he said, tapping the screen. Thorn Capital to Europa Vista Holdings 1 Cayman, 3 months ago. I've never seen that wire, I said, leaning in. But you authorized it, the accountant replied, his tone neutral. He zoomed in on the PDF of the transfer order. There it was, an electronic signature. F. Bryant. My blood ran cold. I felt the floor drop out from under me. That's not my signature. Odessa, who had been buried in a stack of incorporation documents, was at my side instantly. She stared at the screen. Say that again. It's not mine, I said, my voice shaking. It's close. He scanned an old signature and turned it into a digital stamp. But the loop on the F is wrong. I never do it that way. I remembered Corbin's email to his lawyer, the one I wasn't supposed to see. It's best to keep her signing some of the liability paperwork. Keep her on the hook. He hadn't just been planning to push me out. He had been actively setting me up as the fall guy. Odessa looked at me, her eyes devoid of pity, only calculation. This changes everything. This is no longer a divorce. This is no longer a corporate fight. This is self-preservation. Audra. He didn't just sideline you. He implicated you right now. If this fund collapses, you are the co-signer on a fraudulent wire transfer. You are a co-conspirator. The air in the sterile room suddenly felt thin. The objective wasn't just revenge anymore. The objective was to stay alive. Alistair called that night on the new secure phone. It was a video conference. His face was stern, framed by a dark, wood-paneled library. Odessa and I sat side by side at the glass table. I told him about the forgery. He didn't react. He simply nodded as if I had just confirmed the weather. I assumed as much, he said, his voice a cold rumble. Amateurs are always sloppy. It's why we are moving carefully. Now, let me be clear about my own position. He then laid out his half of the board. For the last 6 months, as his financial team flagged the creative reports from Thorn Meridian, Alistair had been quietly buying. He hadn't used his own name. He operated through 3 obscure Delaware-based shell companies, all managed by Odessa's firm. He was buying out the smaller, nervous investors. Corbin, in his arrogance, saw these as 3 separate, passive funds. He didn't see the single hand closing around him. As of this morning, Alistair stated, I have quietly acquired a 54% controlling stake in Thorn Meridian Group. Corbin believes he is the majority shareholder. He is not. He is a high-salaried employee in a company I own. He just doesn't know it yet. He leaned into the camera. I do not, he said, his voice laced with cold fury, enjoy being treated as a stupid ATM. So, we strike, I said, my blood pounding. We call an emergency meeting. No, Odessa said, cutting me off. We don't. We don't tip our hand. We file. We build the cage before we rattle it. For the next week, Odessa's team launched a silent procedural war. They filed a blizzard of motions in Delaware and New York, all carefully worded to look like bureaucratic housekeeping. Petitions for data preservation were sent to Thorn Meridian's IT department. Third-party record preservation subpoenas were sent to the banks in the Caymans. Routine audit inquiries. They were quiet legal tripwires. Corbyn's legal team would see them, but they would dismiss them as the nuisance filings of a disgruntled wife's divorce lawyer. They wouldn't see the coordinated attack from a securities lawyer. My job was to build the weapon. I was the insider. Odessa needed me to translate the data into crimes. I sat at that glass table for 72 hours writing. I built the insider's dossier. I didn't just show the wire transfers. I explained why they were fraudulent. I showed how Corbyn's team systematically inflated the projected valuations of our Miami properties by 20% right before a capital raise. I flagged the consulting fees that I knew from deleted emails were payoffs to a corrupt city councilman. I pulled the expense reports showing how Corbyn had buried the cost of the Paris jet, his personal dinners, and Blythe's shopping sprees under the budget for Europa Vista project development. This was the hardest part, the waiting. We had to let Corbyn continue to believe he was winning. Let him stay in Paris, Alistair commanded over the phone. Let him feel victorious. Every $1,000 bottle of wine he buys my daughter is another wiretap charge of misappropriation of fund assets. Let him keep sending incriminating emails from his company account. Let him dig. So I had to watch. I sat in that sterile apartment, the blinds drawn, and forced myself to look at Instagram. Blythe posted a photo of them at the loo with the caption, "Culture plus Capital." Someone tagged Corbyn in a photo at a 3-star Michelin restaurant, raising a glass, looking like the king of the world. My stomach churned, but it wasn't jealousy. Not anymore. It was cold and raging. Every post was another exhibit. Exhibit A, the gala. Exhibit B, the opera. Then, 3 days later, the secure phone buzzed. It was Alistair. "It's time," he said. He explained the final move. A series of large, multi-million-dollar transfers for the Europa Vista Fund were scheduled to be finalized in 48 hours. These wires would move the bulk of the investor capital into the offshore accounts. "There is a clause in the original Thorn Meridian Partnership Agreement," Alistair said, "one I am sure you remember. Article 7.3. I knew it by heart. It was the clause I had fought for before my wedding. It stipulates that in the event of an executive dispute or a question of fraud, the physical presence of the co-founding partners in the primary operating jurisdiction is required for arbitration. Odessa is filing the injunction right now in Delaware, Alistair said, citing the forged signature as evidence of fraud. It will freeze those transfers. Corbyn will be blindsided, but to challenge his authority and activate the clause, you must be physically present. You are the other co-founding partner. You need to be in Paris. The next day, I was at Philadelphia International Airport. I was not in the private lounge. I was not walking across the tarmac to a G650. I was in Terminal A, Gate 17. I was in seat 24B, an economy plus seat, wedged between a software salesman and a woman with a small child. It was the ultimate, humiliating reversal of the life I had known. But on my lap was the new encrypted laptop. In the belly of the plane was my duffel bag containing the hard copies of the archive. I wasn't Audra Thorne, the CEO's discarded wife. I was Audra Vance, the key witness and the proxy for the new majority shareholder. The plane began its takeoff roll, the engines whining, pushing me back into the cheap upholstered seat. I looked out the small plastic window at the clouds. Corbyn was up there somewhere, miles ahead, drinking champagne in his private jet, thinking he was a conqueror. I was in the back of the bus, flying over the same ocean with a guillotine in my carry-on bag. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who felt truly dangerous. While Corbyn and Blythe were dining at Le Jules Verne, suspended in a bubble of light inside the Eiffel Tower, I was in a cramped café in the 6th arrondissement, drinking bitter espresso from a thick ceramic cup. They were a portrait of new money perfection. Blythe in a white silk dress would be laughing, holding up her champagne glass for another selfie. Corbin in a bespoke blue suit would be playing the part of the indulgent, powerful mentor, his hand resting on her knee under the table. They were living the dream he was selling. I, on the other hand, was sitting across from Odessa King and a very severe, very expensive-looking French lawyer named Antoine. The café was small, smelling of old coffee and rain. Spread between us on the tiny marble table was a stack of legal documents. "This," Antoine said, his English precise, "is the assignation en refaire. It is an emergency summons. We are petitioning the commercial court based on your affidavit." He tapped the document next to my cup. "You are attesting under penalty of perjury that your signature was forged on the primary funding documents for Europa Vista Holdings 1, 2, and 3. "Which it was," I said. "The result is this, a judicial order effective in 1 hour, freezing all capital transfers from those entities. The accounts will be locked pending a full evidentiary hearing." I picked up the heavy, old-fashioned pen. As Blythe was posting a story of her dessert, a perfect gold-dusted chocolate sphere, I was signing my name. One signature to halt a $5 million transfer. Another to freeze the Cayman SPV. A third to alert the Swiss bank that was holding our investors' capital. Each stroke of the pen was a wire being cut. Each signature was a knot tightening around the neck of Corbin's European fantasy. Odessa watched me, a small, grim smile on her face. "They're staying at the Plaza Athénée," she said, checking her secure phone. "Suite 801. Alistair lands in 20 minutes. He's booked the presidential suite on the 9th floor, directly above them." "Why?" I asked, confused. "Why in the same hotel? Why not let the injunction hit and watch him panic from afar?" Odessa began packing the signed documents into her briefcase. "Alistair believes liars need a stage," she said, snapping the lock shut. "He wants to see your husband's face. He wants to give him the news in person." From Blythe's perspective, the dream was only getting better. They had shopped on Avenue Montaigne. She had bags from Chanel and Dior. All paid for with the Black Centurion card linked to the Europa Vista Development Fund. She was the star of her own movie, but the cracks were showing, even if she didn't see them. Corbin had become tense. His phone, a permanent attachment to his hand. He was snapping at his CFO over text, his messages short and brutal. "Handle the FUD," he typed. "Or I'll find someone who can." FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's what Odessa's legal filings were. Just a little sand in the gears, making the big investors nervous. "Is everything okay?" Blythe had asked over breakfast, pouting as she pushed a raspberry around her plate. "It's just some old money investors getting cold feet," Corbin had said, forcing a smile. He kissed her. "Nothing I can't handle. Now, we have a meeting this afternoon, and then the night is ours." The meeting was with a bank in Zurich. A video call to finalize the last massive capital transfer. It was scheduled for 3 p.m. Paris time. At 2:55 p.m., as Corbin straightened his tie in the mirror of Suite 801, the bank's general counsel joined the call early. "Mr. Thorne," the Swiss banker said, his voice flat and apologetic. "We must postpone. We have just received an emergency judicial order from the Tribunal de Commerce. All fund assets related to the Europa Vista entities are frozen, effective immediately." Corbin's blood ran cold. He stared at the screen. "That's impossible. That's a mistake." "It is no mistake," the banker said. "It is signed by a judge. It was filed on behalf of Ms. Audra Vance." Corbin's world stopped. He ended the call without a word. He stared at the wall. Audra here. He was still processing, still trying to calculate. When the doorbell rang, he assumed it was room service. Champagne, maybe a late lunch. He was composing the furious, threatening email to his lawyers in his head as he pulled open the heavy door. It was not room service. Standing in the hallway was Alistair Vance, his face carved from granite. Beside him was Odessa King, holding a thick leather briefcase. Beside her was Antoine, the French lawyer, and standing next to Alistair, looking directly into Corbin's eyes, was me. I was not the woman he had left in the penthouse. I was not the crying, hysterical wife. I was dressed in a simple, dark gray suit. My hair was pulled back. My face was calm. I was holding nothing. Corbin's face went through 3 distinct, rapid phases: total shock, followed by panicked confusion, and landing on a mask of pure, white-hot rage. "Audra," he breathed, his voice a venomous whisper. "What is this? What have you done? May we come in?" Alistair Vance's voice cut through the air, low and powerful. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked past Corbin into the center of the magnificent suite, the rest of us following like a tide. "What's going on, Corbin?" "Who is?" Blythe's voice trailed off as she emerged from the bedroom. She was wearing a white hotel bathrobe. Her hair was wrapped in a towel. Half her face was covered in a foundation mask. She stopped dead when she saw her father. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a child's. "What are you doing here?" Alistair didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Corbin. "Mr. Thorne," Alistair said, "you are in my suite." "This is my suite," Corbin snapped, trying to regain his footing, puffing his chest out. "Suite 801. "No," Alistair said. "You are in a suite being paid for by my capital, from a fund I am the primary investor in, therefore it is my suite." He gestured to the opulent room, the shopping bags, the half-empty bottle of champagne. "Thank you for the hospitality." He walked to the ornate desk and placed a heavy, spiral-bound dossier on the marble top. The label on the spine was printed in stark black letters, Evidence Phase 1. "As of 8 a.m. this morning," Alistair said, his voice casual as if discussing the weather. "My holding companies assumed a 54% controlling stake in Thorne Meridian. You are no longer CEO. You are an employee, and one who is about to be terminated for cause." Corbin laughed. A high, thin, desperate sound. "You're insane. You're... This is Audra. This is a divorce tactic. She's obsessed. She's trying to ruin me." He gestured at me. "She's been stealing data. She's vindictive. She can't handle being left." He turned to Alistair. "And you? You're letting her do this. And Blythe? I was mentoring her. She's a brilliant talent, and this is harassment." Alistair simply waited for the tantrum to subside. When Corbin was finished, breathing heavily, Alistair picked up a single sheet of paper from Odessa's briefcase. "Is this your email?" he asked. "Sent from your company account to your CFO, Gerald Hines, 3 weeks ago." He read from it. "If she makes trouble, just let her take responsibility for the paperwork. She's still my wife. They'll go easy." Corbin's face went white. He had been so sure that it was deleted. Blythe, standing by the doorway, finally understood. Her face crumpled. "Dad, what paperwork?" Alistair finally turned his cold gaze on his daughter. "The paperwork, Blythe, for the shell companies in the Caymans that Mr. Thorne put your name on, the ones he's been using to wash his consulting fees. You aren't his partner. You aren't his girlfriend. You're his mule." The girl's composure shattered. She let out a wail, a truly broken sound. But her rage, born of pure entitlement, wasn't aimed at Corbin. It wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at her father. "You did this," she shrieked, tears streaking through her makeup. "You're always interfering. You're trying to ruin my life. I love him. I watched this all unfold. This grotesque theater of entitlement and fraud. I looked past them out the grand window at the rooftops of Paris. The city was beautiful, indifferent, and I suddenly felt light. I was the only person in this room who wasn't owned. Corbin was owned by his ego. Blythe was owned by her father's money. Alistair was owned by his need for control. I was owned by nothing. I was living on my data, on my memory, on my skill. Alistair, I said, my voice cutting through Blythe's sobs. Everyone stopped. May I have a few minutes alone with Mr. Thorne? Alistair studied my face, then nodded. Odessa, Antoine, let's wait in the hall. Blythe gets dressed. You are coming with me. They filed out, leaving me alone with my husband. The air in the room was thick with his hatred and my quiet, cold victory. You, he hissed, his face contorted. You low-class, ungrateful. I made you. You made me a scapegoat, Corbin, I said. I pulled out my new secure phone and hit the record button in my pocket. You put my name on fraudulent documents. I protected you, he yelled, taking a step toward me. It was just a failsafe. You're still my wife. Legally, they would never come after you. I was taking the heat off the fund. You cut my accounts, I said, my voice level. You left me with nothing. I left you a generous offer, he shouted. I left you a way out and you brought him Alistair Vance. You think he's your friend? He's a shark. He's using you to steal my company. He didn't forge my name, I said. He stared at me, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. The fight went out of him. He was a deflating balloon. Audra, he whispered, trying the old charm. The last desperate move. Honey, we can fix this. You and me. We built this. We can push him out. Tell me what you want. The penthouse. Half, you want half. It's yours. Just call them off. Call off these lawyers. I recorded it all. The confession, the threats, the pathetic, desperate bargaining. I stopped the recording. It's over, Corbin. I walked to the door and opened it. Odessa and Alistair were waiting. Corbin pushed past me, his face a mask of sweat and rage. I'm going for a walk, he snarled. I'm going to call my lawyers. You'll be hearing from them. He stormed down the hall to the private elevator. He jabbed the button. He didn't look back. I watched him go. A walk won't do him much good, Odessa said, checking her watch. As the elevator doors opened for him in the grand, marble-floored lobby of the Plaza Athénée, 2 uniformed officers from the French Brigade Financière were waiting. They were accompanied by a man in a dark suit from the U.S. Embassy. Mr. Corbin Thorne, one of them said, his French accent thick. Corbin froze. We have a request from the United States Department of Justice, the man continued. Polite but firm. We need to ask you to come with us, and we will be holding your passport pending the investigation. The news of Corbin's detention in Paris hit the financial wires at 4 a.m. New York time. By the time the markets opened, the Thorne Meridian scandal was the only thing on television. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Our publicly traded partners saw their stocks crater. Investors from massive pension funds to smaller family offices were in a full-blown panic. The glass tower of Thorne Meridian, the one I had helped build, was burning. I was back in the United States, installed in a stark, anonymous office in one of Alistair Vance's New York properties. Odessa had been explicit. You are not to be seen. You are not to speak to the press. You are not under any circumstances to look like an avenging wife. You are a material witness and the co-founder of a company in crisis. Let the lawyers do the talking. So I sat 20 floors above the city in a room with no name on the door and watched the inferno I had lit. I had a direct, agonizing view of the Thorn Meridian headquarters just 3 blocks away. It looked like a ship I had designed, now dead in the water, taking on water fast. Then the second bomb dropped. A video leaked by an anonymous employee went viral. It was from an old company holiday party. Corbyn, flushed with champagne, holding court with a circle of junior analysts. He was telling a story, his voice slurring with arrogance. The key to any European trip, he bragged, is the right intern. An intern is just a carry-on, really, and Paris is always more fun when your luggage knows how to keep quiet. The clip was everywhere in an hour. He was no longer just a potentially corrupt CEO. He was the living symbol of corporate rot, a walking, talking human resources nightmare. Corbyn was eventually released from French custody. His passport confiscated. He was allowed to return to the United States, but he was grounded under federal supervision. His arrival at JFK was not the triumphant return of a conqueror. It was a media circus. He was ambushed by a wall of cameras, his face pale and furious, as his new, very expensive crisis PR team shoved him into a black SUV. Their counterattack began the next morning. The narrative was simple and vicious. Corbyn Thorne, the visionary, was the victim. He was the target of a coordinated hostile takeover, an illegal corporate coup. And it was engineered by 2 people, a predatory, old-money vulture, Alastair Vance, and his bitter, unstable, and vindictive wife. They used my life against me. They painted me as the girl from Ohio, eaten alive by ambition and class resentment. I was the gold digger who, upon learning her husband was leaving her, decided to burn the entire kingdom to the ground rather than walk away. It was a good story. It was almost believable. Alastair ignored it all. He treated the media storm like bad weather. He simply called an emergency meeting of the Thorn Meridian Board of Directors. The meeting was held in a neutral war room, the main conference center of Odessa's law firm. It was a soundproof, mahogany-paneled tomb. You will be there, Alastair had instructed me. Not as Mrs. Thorne, not as an advisor. You will attend as Ms. Audra Vance, co-founder and primary witness. When I walked in behind Alastair and Odessa, the air in the room was electric with hostility. The remaining board members, the ones Alastair hadn't bought out, stared at me as if I had personally set their portfolios on fire. They saw Alastair as a shark and me as the pilot fish who had led him to the kill. This is an outrage, Alastair. Howard Vance, the oldest board member, snapped before we had even sat down. Your personal games have brought the feds to our door. You've destroyed shareholder value. This is a personal vendetta, and you've used this woman to do it. Alastair simply took his seat at the head of the table. Howard, he said, his voice a cold, quiet rumble. It is Mr. Thorne who brought the feds to your door. I am merely the one who turned on the lights. Ms. Vance is here to show you exactly what you have been approving in the dark. It was my turn. I felt the blood pounding in my ears. I walked to the head of the table. I plugged my encrypted laptop into the main display. I did not cry. I did not speak of Paris or the motel or the sticky note. I gave them the numbers. Good morning, I said, my voice steady. What you are looking at is the parallel accounting system I have been maintaining for the past 4 years. For 60 minutes, I was the woman from Ohio. I was the woman who built the dashboards. I was the cleaner. I showed them the forged wire transfer with my fake signature. I put the date of the transfer on the screen right next to the date Corbyn moved me to the non-executive role. I showed them the incorporation documents for the Cayman SPVs signed by Blythe Thorne, dated just 3 days after her mentorship began. I showed them the original accurate property valuations from our Miami project and then the altered, inflated versions that Corbyn had sent to investors, cross-referenced with his own emails demanding the numbers be optimized for the raise. I was the mapmaker, and I showed them exactly where the train had gone off the rails. When I finished, the tomb was silent. Howard Vance, the man who used to compliment my dresses, was ashen. He stared at the screen, then at the thick binders Odessa's team had placed in front of him. He looked at Alistair, then at me. He let out a long, weary sigh and rubbed his face. "My God," he whispered to the man next to him. "We let the handsome kid drive the train. We never even bothered to check if the mapmaker was telling him to slow down." Alistair stood up. "The Thorn Meridian brand is dead. Corbin Thorne's career is over. The only question is whether this board goes down with him or whether we salvage the assets." He laid out the terms of surrender. 1. Corbin Thorne will resign from all positions, effective immediately. 2. He will forfeit his entire equity stake to the compensation fund we are establishing to make our investors whole. 3. We will cooperate fully with the SEC and the Department of Justice. We will hand them Corbin, and in return, we will secure immunity for the firm itself. He paused, then looked directly at me. And 4. We will restructure. We will form a new entity from the clean-performing assets, and Ms. Audra Vance will be appointed executive chair of the transition. It was a total victory, a complete coup. It was controlled. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt sick. A part of me, the part that had sat on that lumpy motel bed, wanted to light a match to the entire proposal. I wanted to scream no. I wanted to force a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I wanted to liquidate every desk, every server, every lease. I wanted to pull every last dollar out of the burning building and let Corbin, the board, and the entire company turn to ash. But I thought of the 400 other employees, the accountants in Chicago, the analysts in Miami, the administrative staff in New York who had always been kind to me, the people who had never been on a private jet, who had never stolen a dime. They would all be unemployed tomorrow, their pensions, their lives, their futures, all collateral damage in my war. I was standing on the line between justice and destruction, and I had no idea which way to step. The board asked for 24 hours to consult their counsel, which was code for surrender. As Odessa and I were packing our briefcases, her secure phone buzzed. She looked at the text, then at me, her expression unreadable. "A request," she said. "From Blythe Thorne's new lawyer. She's back in New York. She's at her mother's apartment. She is distraught. She refuses to speak to Alistair. She will only speak to you." I agreed. The next morning, we met in an empty conference room high above the city. The girl who walked in was not the confident, glamorous intern from the Plaza Athénée. She was 22, wearing baggy sweats, her hair a tangled mess. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked terrified. The moment she saw me, she collapsed into a chair and began to sob. "I didn't know," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "I swear to God, Audra, I didn't know. He told me the papers were just formalities. He said it was a test to empower me. He said I was a natural. I thought we were building something. I thought he loved me." She was terrified. Terrified of prison. Terrified of her father, who had, I learned, frozen her trust fund and all her credit cards. And most pathetically, she was terrified that Corbin would hate her for messing this up. I sat across from her, and the white-hot rage I had carried for months finally began to cool. It was replaced by a cold, profound pity. She wasn't an architect of this. She was just another one of his tools. She was a victim of the same illusion I had once bought into. Only her version was more pathetic. She was a mirror of a younger, more naive me, but with worse taste in men. "What do you want, Blythe?" I asked, my voice flat. "I wanted to go away," she whispered. "I want him to be okay." I took a deep breath. This was the first real test of my new power. "He is not going to be okay," I said, my voice cutting. "And you are in serious, serious trouble. You are the signatory on multiple fraudulent entities. I didn't know is not a legal defense. This sent her into a fresh wave of panic. I let her cry for a moment. You have one path, and I'm offering it to you. She looked up, her eyes desperate. You will give your lawyer every email, every text message, every password for the accounts Corbin had you open. You will sign a full, detailed affidavit explaining everything he told you to do. You will cooperate fully and completely with the SEC and the DOJ. My father, she whispered, he'll kill me. He'll disown me. No, I said, in exchange for your total cooperation, I will ask your father to protect you. He will use his considerable influence to ensure the prosecutors see you as a material witness, not a co-conspirator. You will likely get a fine and probation, not prison. He will pay for your therapy, and you will go back to school, finish your degree, and learn how to build a life that doesn't depend on a rich man's approval. She stared at me, her mouth open, finally grasping the lifeline I was offering. I stood up. I hadn't come to this meeting to be kind. I had come to secure a witness and neutralize a threat. But as I walked out of the room, leaving her to call her lawyer, I realized it was the first time in this entire war that I had chosen to turn down the heat instead of just pouring more fuel on the fire. It was an autumn morning, crisp and unforgiving. The glass tower of the Thorn Meridian headquarters was surrounded, not by police, but by the press. A ring of white media vans, satellite dishes aimed at the building like weapons. They were all waiting for the same thing, to see if the Thorn Empire would survive or if this was its public execution. I walked from a black sedan. I was not in a $1,000 dress. I was in a simple dark gray suit that I had bought 2 days ago. It was functional. It was armor. The cameras flashed. A wall of blinding white light. Microphones were shoved in my face. Audra, is it true about the takeover? Are you divorcing him for the company? How much did Alistair Vance pay you? I said nothing. I kept my eyes fixed on the revolving glass door. I walked through them, my face set, and I did not look back. The boardroom was a tomb. The air was thick and dead. The board members were already there, pale and silent, nursing coffees. Alistair sat at the head of the table, his place. Then the doors opened, and Corbin walked in. He was flanked by 2 lawyers. He wore a dark suit, but it was rumpled. The collar of his shirt was slightly wrinkled. The vibrant, magnetic energy was gone. He looked thin, gray, and exhausted. And around his left ankle, just visible above his expensive Italian shoe, was the hard black plastic of a court-ordered GPS monitoring bracelet. It was the most stunning, most complete visual contrast to the man I had seen on magazine covers. He looked at me as he took his seat. His eyes were not sad. They were not apologetic. They were a toxic, desperate mix of pure hatred and one last flickering hope of manipulation. Alistair did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He simply began, "Good morning. We are here today to formalize the future of this company based on the findings of our internal investigation and in cooperation with federal authorities." He was blunt. He was cold. He summarized the findings in a monotone: illegal transfer of fund assets, gross misappropriation of capital for personal use, including but not limited to. He read the dates and expenses of the Paris trip, the shopping, the dinners, abuse of executive power and conspiracy to defraud investors. Corbin's lawyer started to speak, but Corbin cut him off. "This is a joke," Corbin said, his voice raw. "This is nothing but a clerical error, a simple accounting mistake. This is a hostile, vindictive action from my wife. My client has not been your wife in any meaningful sense for some time." Odessa's voice cut through the air, sharp as glass, and her new partner. Corbin pressed on, his voice cracking, pointing a shaking finger at Alistair. "He's using her to steal my company." Alistair simply raised an eyebrow. He looked down at the dossier in front of him. Mr. Thorne, are you referring to the accounting error in this email sent from your account to Mr. Hines outlining the plan to keep her on the hook for the European liability? He slid a copy down the table. Or perhaps the clerical error detailed in this audio file recorded in Paris, where you admit to forging her signature and attempting to bribe her with half the company to call off the lawyers? He pressed a button. My voice, and then Corbin's, filled the silent room. You forged my name. I protected you. It was just a failsafe. Corbin sank in his chair, his face white. Or maybe, Alistair continued, his voice relentless. You mean the vindictive action detailed in this signed sworn affidavit from my daughter, Blythe Thorne, complete with all text messages itemizing every SPV you had her sign her name to as a test of her empowerment. He dropped the final thick document onto the table. Checkmate. There was no other story to tell. The heir left the room. Alistair looked around the table. We are moving on to the future of Thorne Meridian. He paused, and his eyes found me. He stood up. It was the first time he had done so. It was a gesture of respect. Ms. Audra Vance, he said, his voice resonating. She is not just a co-founder. She is, as it turns out, the only person in this room who knows how to build something of value without stealing it from someone else. He looked directly at me, his face stern, but his eyes were something else. He spoke to the entire room, to the investors, to the lawyers, to Corbin. This is Audra Vance. To me, she is a daughter. Not because she married or divorced anyone, but because her hands, her skill, and her integrity are the only things that just saved everyone else in this company from total ruin. The word daughter landed in the silent room with the force of a gavel. It was a declaration. It was an adoption. It was a transfer of power. More final than any stock certificate. In the back, a press officer's phone was still on, broadcasting the audio to the lobby. The word daughter echoed out over the news feeds. I later learned that Blythe, watching the live stream from her mother's apartment, had heard it and cried in silence. Corbin looked from Alistair to me and back to Alistair. He saw it. He finally saw it. He had no allies. He was an island, and the tide had just come all the way in. We will now vote, Alistair said, sitting down. The resolution was read. 1. Corbin Thorne resigns from all positions. 2. He forfeits his entire equity stake to the Investor Compensation Fund. 3. He will sign a binding agreement barring him for life from ever holding an executive or board position in any publicly traded company. The alternative, Alistair added, as if an afterthought, is that this board votes to dissolve. We hand the entire unmitigated file to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they will pursue the more severe charges of conspiracy and racketeering, which carries a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. The vote was a formality. A series of quiet, defeated eyes went around the table. It was unanimous. Then I spoke. I have one final condition, I said. Every eye turned to me. Corbin looked at me with a tiny, pathetic flicker of hope. Did I want the penthouse art? I will not, I said, build a new future on a rotten foundation. The Thorne Meridian name is poison. The structure is compromised. I propose a split. We will create 2 new legal entities. The clean entity will contain all the stable, performing, profitable assets. It will be rebranded. Its equity will be redistributed with a significant portion held for the senior employees who chose to stay. The dirty entity will hold all of Corbin's fraudulent projects, the bad debt, and the legal liabilities. That entity will be taken through an orderly bankruptcy and liquidation to pay what is owed. I was not just taking over. I was performing surgery. I was separating the cancer from the healthy tissue, and I was letting the cancer die. The board agreed without a word. It was over. As we walked out of the boardroom, the press surged in the lobby. Corbin was flanked by his lawyers, who looked like they had just seen a ghost. Security guards formed a barrier to guide him out. He stopped just as he was passing me. He looked at me, his face a mask of sweaty, pathetic rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice low and desperate. "You'll regret not keeping me." I looked at him. I looked right through him. I felt nothing. No hate, no love, no anger. It was like looking at a house I had sold years ago. It was just a building. It had nothing to do with me. I turned away from him and walked to Alistair, who was waiting by the elevator. "I have work to do," I said to him, my voice clear. "Family dinner later, sir." He understood. He smiled. A small, grim smile. "Of course. Go to work." I had accepted his support. I had not accepted his control. The epilogue is not a long story. It is a single quiet moment. It is 6 months later. I am in a new office. It is not a glass tower. It is in a solid pre-war brick building. The sign on the frosted glass door is simple. It says Bryant Communities. It is a new company born from clean assets. It is majority owned by its employees. We build and manage community-focused sustainable housing. I am sitting at a simple wooden desk, looking at a set of blueprints. They are for a new mixed-use residential complex. It is in Ohio. It is 2 blocks from the street where my mother used to live in that small, drafty apartment. I pick up my pen. The night my rich husband took my stepsister to Paris, I thought I had lost everything. It turns out that was the night I stopped being someone's wife and started being the architect of my own life. And as for her father calling me daughter, that was just a reminder. From now on, any powerful man who wants to stand with me, whether it's a husband or an investor, will have to learn to stand beside me, not in front of me. Thank you for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Zoe's Revenge Stories. Like this video and give it a boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story. If you've listened this far, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you're amazing and that you've been with me every step of the way on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement to me. Comment the number 1 so I can see you, and now, let me tell you the rest of my story.